Hello, this is Ellen from the Make Room, and today we're going to do something for Easter. So I've got a little basket here that I've prepared yesterday. Basically, it's a little pot that you could use for other things. So it's not just for Easter. You could use it afterwards to put makeup, pens, whatever you like in. All I've done is I've just made some little felt animals beforehand anyway, and I've just put some straw and I've put some chocolate eggs and real eggs. I'm just going to show you what it looks like inside. So it's just a little pot, stiffened pot, and I've actually turned the top over to make it a little bit shallower so it's more like a nest. So if I press that, got the crease out, it would just be a little pot that I could use for anything really in the house. You can make really large ones to put newspapers, magazines in, and they look really nice around the house out of any fabric really. But for this purposes we're going to make quite a small one, and we're going to just turn it down so it's sort of almost nest size. Now you can use any fabric for this. Obviously I've tried to use kind of spring colours that I've got hanging around, and I've got some really nice kind of deer fabric here which is really pretty, so I'm going to use this for the one I'm going to show you. So first of all, you want something to draw around that is kind of the approximate size you want to make the base. Now, one of my bobbin holders is perfect for this, and that's what I use for that. So I'm going to use this first. Now, if you're going to use this pot later, you might want to see in there, if you've got a patterned fabric, you might want to see in there a whole deer or whatever it is, like birds or whatever. So when you're cutting out your circles, you want to think about that. So maybe place it around a whole picture position on. Obviously if it's just a floral fabric it doesn't matter. Now you could just draw around with some coloured chalk, or if your fabric's a dark colour then white chalk, or a pencil, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to put it over one of these deers. The one that's on the bottom doesn't really matter, so I'm going to do one here over these two deer, and I'm just going to draw around it. Just going to use pencil, it doesn't matter, it's not going to show, it's all going to get hidden in the seams. And then on top of that you want to add a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance all the way round. Now if you're not good at judging that, just put the metal end of your tape measure, put 1.5 on your pencil line and just move it around the circle, putting little markers on the metal edge, which is 1.5 away from the circle that you've drawn, all the way round, and that will help you get a perfect circle with a seam allowance. And then we're going to cut round that, and then if you wanted the same picture you could just lay it on another picture to pattern match it and cut it out again. I'm not so worried because one's going to go at the bottom which we won't see. I'll just get my scissors, cut round that, and then we're going to cut out two. So put as many little dots around as you need in order to cut the circle with the seam allowance. Or you could use a bigger plate or something that's big enough to allow your seam allowance all the way around to draw around. So I've got one circle with my deer in the middle. I'm just going to position it anyway really, just not wasting fabric, so actually probably right at the top there. Keep the grain going in the same direction as the one that you cut. Don't sort of turn them round. If you have got a pattern, keep it going up, because if you turn the grains around on the two pieces it can make a difference, although we are going to interface it, so it's going to stabilise it anyway. So I just pin that one on. I'm just going to cut round that one again so that I've got two. So obviously we've got to cut a strip to go around the side, and you know obviously it's not always that easy to work out what the circumference of that circle is. So the easiest way is just to get a tape measure and actually put it around the line that you drew originally, all the way around, and you'll get an approximate measurement of what that is. Now it's come to about 44 centimetres. I'm going to cut 50 centimetre strip. It's always better to allow more, because as you move, we're going to put it around, sometimes you lose a bit in that and you might need more. So I would advise you to cut it more than you think, just to be on the safe side. You can cut off what you don't need. So we need something that's at least 50 centimetres around, and with this one I made them the actual finished depth 10 centimetres. So I cut a 13 centimetre strip so that there was a 1.5 centimetre seam either side. But for this one I want to get a whole deer on the side of my pot, because if I use it again later for something else, I don't want to see sort of half a deer or head cut off or something. Now if you are making it as a pot that's not turned over at the top, you might also want the ones inside to be, you know, if you've got a pattern and that is directional like this, you might want whole deers inside, and obviously they will be going, it won't be just a folded over like that, because that would be upside down inside. So you've got to cut two pieces that you join at the top. But if you're going to turn the top over, so if it's like that and we're going to turn it over, then actually with it upside down it works perfectly, because now they're the right way up. So you've just got to think about whether if you've got a patterned fabric with a definite thing on it, you just got to think about that. Do I want to turn the top over so that I see it in the right direction, or will I be having just a pot eventually? In that case I would just make them go in the same direction either side. This one I'm definitely going to turn over whatever happens. Even if I used it afterwards, I kept it turn over. So I'm actually going to have them going up and down that way. So I'm going to cut my strips. Now if your fabric has not been cut straight along the bottom edge, you don't really know if it has, then either get a book or even just the edge of your table. Put the selvage edge on the edge of the table, and then just, you can cut along that edge. So any right angle, you're going to get a perfect line across the bottom. You can just use a book, put it along the edge of your selvage and draw a line. This is, and I can tell by the pattern on this that it's, whether it's straight or not. Obviously that may not be correct if the pattern's not been printed on correctly, but it looks straight to me. So first of all I'm going to measure the depth that I want my strip to be, and I'm looking at getting in a whole set of reindeer here. So my reindeer from top to bottom are 12 centimetres, so I'm actually going to make the finished pot 12 centimetres. So I'm going to add on 1.5 either side for the seam allowances, so I'm going to cut a 15 centimetre strip. So from the bottom of my fabric, not from the bottom, I'm going to find the where I want the picture to be, and I'm going to add on 1.5 to see where I'm going to cut that. So I just need to cut a little bit off the bottom to get that correct. So I'm just going to cut a little sliver to get it where I want it to start on the pattern. You need it to be at least 50 centimetres long, so I'm just going to mark 50. Don't go too far. And I'm going to measure up now by 15 centimetres from the bottom. I'm just putting a pin line in. You can put a chalk line or a pencil line, whatever you prefer. I'm just going to cut that first rectangle. If you start cutting the rectangle, you can just fold it over and line it up and carry on cutting. Work too. Now I'm going to cut another one. Again, for the one inside, I'm not as bothered about where the picture is, so I'm not going to waste fabric. I'm going to use this one here, just wherever it comes for the inside of the pot. Level that off there, it's just gone a bit wonky. got my 2 strips and I've got my 2 circles. And now we're just going to use some heavy interface. Now either you need like firm interface, or Vilene it's sometimes called, or craft interface, sometimes they call it that, but it's just sticky on one side. That's not sticky, this is, with an iron, and it's quite firm, as you can see, it's not floppy. If you haven't got that and you say got medium interface, you could put sort of 2 or 3 layers of that on. So I'm going to need 2 circles for the bases and 2 strips for this. You need to stiffen both sides, otherwise it just won't be firm enough for what you need it to do. I've got the salvages on there, but I won't be using those. We very rarely use salvages in anything that we make, because sometimes when you wash things, the salvages can shrink in. You don't want that to happen, so we tend to cut them off. So I'm just going to see if I can get, I can't, so I'm just going to fold that over, cut out 2 there, so pin it on and cut round. Now these will stick on with the iron. It's best to use a pressing cloth to be on the safe side if you're not sure how hot your iron gets. Pressing cloths, these are good. These are just mesh cloths that you can put the interface on, remember sticky side down, and you can put that over, and if anything goes wrong, if the adhesive does come through, it won't come through onto your iron, it will come through onto the cloth. So that's a good thing to do, just to protect your iron. If you haven't got that, then just test a little bit somewhere on a little scrap, just a tiny bit, to see if the iron's okay, or maybe just use a very thin tea towel or something, quite a high heat. Normally interface tells you along the side of it how long it takes to adhere. It's normally 8 seconds on 2 dots on your iron, but you'll know when it's stuck, because you'll just see. Okay, so I'm going to go and stick those on. Okay, so I've got my interface stuck onto the back of my pieces, and the next thing I'm going to do is going to clip along the bottom edge of these long pieces 1.5 centimetres in. Now if you're not sure what that is, you might want to draw a line to clip up to, and we're going to use the tips of the large scissors to do that, and you're just going to cut probably every couple of centimetres a clip up to the 1.5 centimetre line, all the way along. Probably the closer together they are, the easier it's going to be, but you don't want it more than every 1.5 to 2 centimetres. Probably that's enough. Just cut along that one. I'm just going to do the same to this one. Now my outside of my pot is going to be the one where I've got the whole deer. So that's, I'm going to use the base that's not going to show is the one, that one, to put onto that one. And the one that's going to show on the inside of the pot is the one with the whole deer, but that will be with the inside pattern, which I'm not so worried about. So I'm going to just make sure they're with the right circles. And then what I'm going to do is put, so we're putting, if you put the right side together and then peel it back, you can't go wrong. So we've got the right sides of fabric together. I'm going to start, doesn't matter where you start anywhere, and put a pin in at the top of that 1.5 centimetre clip. And then you will find that you'll be able to move around the top, keeping the edge of the straight bit on the edge of the circle. You'll be able to move round and pin it all the way around 1.5 centimetres in from the edge, because the little clips are going to open up and splay open and let you do that. You do need the clips to be almost at that line, because otherwise it won't splay open enough. So don't be afraid. We're going to stitch it just above the cuts, so they won't be a problem. But this is the outside pot. Now the inside pot technically has got to be a little, the inside lining of the pot has got to be technically a little bit smaller, otherwise it's not going to fit very well. So I'm going to think about that when I cut the next one, or prepare the next one rather. So you can see I've come to the end, I've got quite a lot over, so I'm just going to unpin it, get that one butting up to leave a seam allowance. And you can see now I can decide where to join it, rather than to cut it first and you find it's a bit short. It's best to just pin it all the way around. You can see it's splayed out all the way around, and now I can decide where to do that seam. I'm just butting them up and just making sure they come to the circle. And then whatever distance that is, I'm going to do a seam all the way to the top of the pot. You might want to measure it just so you get it exact. It's 4.5 centimetres. It's fine. And that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to machine that down. So you might want to undo these 2 pins either side of it first. And we can machine down that, trim that off and press it open. So that joining seam will be nice and flush. I could just cut these fabric off to leave the seam allowance now, like that. So that's ready to sew along there. And then we're going to sew all the way around the circle. Before I do that, I'm just going to mention the fact that obviously we want the inside one to be slightly smaller. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim off maybe just about a couple of millimetres off my inner circle, so that when I do fix the other one on, it's going to be a bit smaller. Literally, you don't need to do much, just a millimetre or 2 all the way around will make it just that fraction smaller. Just a tiny bit I've just taken off that circle. And then I'm going to put this one on now. But the thing that we do have to remember is that the tops are going to join each other. So we don't want this top to be smaller than this. So I'm going to sort of ease it back out to the original size at the top. It's just so that it sits in easily when you put the inner one in. I'm going to pin this one all the way around. As you can see, they're inside out at the moment. The interface is on the outer side as I'm working. Okay, so I've come back to the original. I'll just unpin that so that I can sort of work out where this needs to be joined, just like I did the one over there. Just work out where you need to join it. There, I think. Just check that's right. Yeah. But obviously I want the top to be the same distance as this top. Now the easiest way to do that is just fold that flat and measure it to where you're going to sew it on the sewing machine, where that comes to 22 centimetres across. So just do the same on this top. Just measure across 22 and put a pin in, and then you know the tops are going to be matching and you won't have to struggle fitting one into the other. So I've got a pin in. So I'm just going to do a seam from that pin to that pin, and it's a slight slanted line because we're making it fit again at the top. It's not enough to really notice, but that will be exactly the same as that. So when we put them together, so I can trim that off now and just go and sew all those seams. So I'll take you over to the machine and show you how to do that curve sewing and do the seams. Okay, so we're at the sewing machine. That's my first bit of sewing. These 2 seams down the side, they're 1.5 from the edge, so you can use your mark or use your pin line. Reverse at the top to lock it off, and reverse again. So I've sort of unpinned it a bit to do that. Okay, don't try and do it with it pinned up, it's too difficult. So I'm going to take that pin out. So So that one's unpinned. I can just do that seam first. You don't want to be hitting the head of a pin or something on the other side. So I might want to trim those to about 1 centimetre, and then I'm going to press them open. So you can see I've pressed them nice and flat. I trimmed them first to 1 centimetre. Now I'm just going to pin that around the circle, the bit I unpinned, to do that seam. Just get it nice and flat all the way around. You can see how all the little bits I clipped splay open and help me do that. You can see they're all splayed out all the way around. So it doesn't really matter where you start, just put it under your machine, take out a pin to lower your pressure foot down, get the needle where you want it to be. Now you can use your 1.5 marker now, or you can just watch that you're going just to above the little clips that you've made in that outer layer. You can reverse, although we are going to go over this when we get to the end, and just gradually go round. You're just turning it with your hand. Go slowly if you're not used to doing this. And you're just going to go all the way around that circle, just above those slits. You shouldn't get any pleats then. That's why you need to clip it as close to that line as possible, because if you don't, you'll get little pleats in the outer bit. Applies to quite a bit of dressmaking too. We need to clip quite close to anything that we've got to turn that's a curve. Some people don't clip it far enough. So I've just come back to where I started, so I'm just going to reverse, cut on my threads. And now I'm going to trim that seam allowance to quite small, probably 0.5 centimetre. All the way around. You don't want much bulk in this where the seams are. It's much easier to work with a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance than try to start with a small seam allowance like this. Okay, so you can see that that's nice and on, and then when I turn it through, you'll see that it's already a pot shape. This is my inner one, because it's my inner one, because that's what's going to show on the inside of the pot, which is the whole deer. But this is going to be the insides of my pot in actual fact, so it's actually going to be like that when it's done. I'm just going to do the other one, and then I'll show you how to join the two together. Okay, so this is my outer one, because I've got a whole deer on here. And this is going to be my inner one that's inside out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slot the inner one over the outer one at this, but matching those two seams. So I'm going to put one inside the other, but match those two seams there and there. And you're going to pin around the whole top. Now again, because the inner one has got to be a little bit smaller than the outer one, sometimes it's a good idea to just trim off before you start. Probably, again, just 0.5 centimetre from the top of that inner one. And it's just going to make it a little bit shallower, and it'll sit in nicely into the other pot, into the inside of the pot. So again, not too much. Just a little sliver, just a couple of millimetres all the way around that top edge. And obviously you could just mismatch it by that at the top, but it's probably easier to trim it off, and then you can't really go wrong. So I'm just going to slot that over the outer one. Again, match it at the top. And I'm going to start pinning all the way around at the top here. Now, because we made sure they were the same size, they should fit perfectly. If you find they don't match, then normally you can just stretch one a little bit to match the other. Now we've got to leave a gap somewhere here because we've got to turn this through. So just be aware of that, and the best way to mark that is to put some vertical pins, just so that you remember to leave a gap too. So I'm going to leave a gap of about that, probably about 8 centimetres, something like that. And I'm going to sew the rest of it around. So I'm going to sew all the way around the top at 1.5 centimetres, leaving a gap to turn it through. Now you can probably do this sleeve arm by just sliding it on like this. It's deep enough. So I'm just going to start now using my 1.5 marker on my machine. And I'm just going to reverse at where I put that marker pin, just to lock it off all around the top. Okay, so I've come back to that other pin, so I'm just going to reverse and pick up my threads. And now I'm going to trim that seam allowance away. But where the gap is, I'm going to leave it at its full width. So I'm going to cut in from where the gap is, and I'm just going to trim off to leave, again, probably only about ½ centimetre all the way around the top there. And that's the gap again, so I'm just going to clip up and just leave it a bit, just make it easier for you to turn it in where you've got to machine that later. So there's my hole. So I'm going to turn the whole thing through now, through that hole. Just pull it all the way through. And get your hands in, you can sort of push out the outer one. Or sometimes a knitting needle is quite useful, the blunt end of a knitting needle to push in. So this is my outer one and this is my inner one. So I'm going to put the inner one in now. And you can see I've already got almost a pot finished. Now it's really useful actually if you can press this flat first before you try and press it along the edge. And the way to do that is if you've got a sleeve arm, to put your sleeve arm through there and press this. Just makes it easier to get a nice sharp nice press there without like a lip. So I'm just going to go and do that first and then I'll come back. So you can see what I've done is I've actually now pressed that completely flat all the way around, and there's my gap. And I'm going to machine close to this top edge all the way around my pot now. A good way to do this is to put the edge of your foot against the edge of the fabric, and then move your needle right across so that you get quite close, or any other marker on your foot. I'm going to try and get a little bit closer, so I'm using the kind of silver part of my foot, and I'm going to move my needle over with the zigzag width button or dial if you've got a machine with dials. And I'm just going to now go all the way around the top edge of my pot, and that will close up that hole, and also just finish off the top really, just top stitching, looks quite nice. And again, I've just taken the sleeve arm off so that I can slide it on because it's deep enough to do that. And I've just come back to the beginning, so I'll just cut those threads from where I started. And as you can see, we have a very nice finished pot. Now that's quite a nice pot on its own for anything. And often what I do is I put little handles on these for pots around the house, whether they're big pots or little pots. But this one we can turn down if we want to, just to make it into a much more smaller shape. So there we have it. I'm going to keep this one as a little nest pot because this one's deeper, because I had to get the whole reindeer on. I think what I'm going to do is buy a large Easter egg to put in here. Nice gift to give somebody with an Easter egg in, and then they can use the pot afterwards for whatever they like. we'll make some little felt animals and put them in for children. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe. It's free, and I post a new video every Friday. So see you again next time, and happy Easter.